MySQL Views. My name is Sherry Cabral. I'm a database administrator. I work for the Pythian Group. So let's see. There's my email address, cabral@pythian.com. So if you have any questions that you don't get to or you don't, want to ask on the Meetup group site or whatever, you can just let me know. So there we go. The Pythian Group. I just talked about that. So what is a view? Well, if you want to talk relationally, like go back to your relational algebra that we all forgotten if we ever knew it to begin with, it's a virtual table, right? It's a table that refers to another table. If you take something like your bank statement, for instance, you have your little, check register, and you say, okay, I started with $100 in my checking account, and then I got my paycheck, and then I paid my bills, and like each transaction is either a plus or a minus, and then on the side you have, okay, what's my total now? So theoretically, that would be a view, right? You would start with your opening balance, and then you have all these transactions that you do, and then whatever the current balance is, that's kind of like, you can think of that as a view, right? Because it's just taking all of your transactions, all of your pluses and minuses, and saying, okay, I'm going to add these all up and subtract the ones I need to subtract, and here's the balance. That's not really how your bank balance works, because to calculate that for over years of whatever you're doing would be way too much. But it's a virtual table. And because of that, the definition of, like when you define it in terms of another table. That's how it's implemented in SQL. All right. So I'm going to click here. MySQL's implementation is closer to the relational model because it's virtual. There are other, like Oracle and SQL Server allow you to have materialized views, which just means the data is materialized, meaning it becomes a real table.
So if you shut down the server and restart it again, you will have those views.
I don't know if you have the views with the data in it again, but it's basically, I don't know if it's a temporary table in that kind of way, or if it's a permanent table. I don't know if anyone else here knows about views.
I think it's just it's almost like a procedure. So when the first call that gets called, it rebuilds the table.
Okay, and that's in
Microsoft SQL.
in SQL Server?
Yeah.
So it's basically virtual, or?
Yeah, I would call it virtual. It gets built when somebody runs that view.
Oh, okay, but it builds it every time. So for instance, you could have an index on a calculated field, right? Which you can't do with MySQL views because it doesn't materialize the data. So I guess it's a temporary thing, and there's still a performance impact, but there's things that you can't do because of the materialized view.
Does it mean that views are in memory only?
Views are, well, it doesn't store the data as a view per se. Basically what it does, and you can see this with like an explain, what it actually does is it stores the view as a table definition, and then will run your query against like the table definition. So if you have a view that has, in fact, here I'll show you. So if we go here and we do MySQL-u root, everyone knows my local machine's root password because it's very secure. And we go to the Sequela sample database. We do a show. I'm getting ahead of myself here. We go show create view staff list. So this output isn't really so great, but you can see that it says select s.staff ID as blah 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 from. We've got a whole bunch of joins, right? So let me do select star from staff list limit 5. I think there's only 2 entries in here. Okay, and so you can see basically staff list has ID, name, address, zip code, phone, city, country, and then whatever SID is. Basically, if you look, the staff table just has names, and then it references an address table, and so this kind of just joins it all together. So you've got your normalized schema with names in one table and addresses in another table, and then this view will bring them together. Which is actually one of the benefits of it, right? If you have a developer that doesn't want to deal with a joining thing, I don't want to deal with that. They can just use this staff list table to get the staff addresses. So if I put an explain in front of here, and if I spell it properly, you can see it actually does all 4 tables that it's addressing. It actually does that. So, and there's no reference to the staff list. You can see this is table S, this is table A, this is table city, and this is table country. So, which leads to interesting things when you're explaining queries and you're like, it doesn't even use that table. Oh, it must be a view.
Is there a performance hit for this then?
Oh yeah, well, so we'll talk about all that stuff and more in the rest of the presentation.
Is there any reason, if you can do a physical join, not to do it?
There isn't. So there are a couple of reasons to use them, and I think that's actually our next. There we go. So why is it useful, you ask? Ask me. Why would anyone use this? I'm glad you asked. The reason is that you can keep your data normalized while giving the feel of something that's denormalized, right? If I want staff and address, why do I have to go to 4 different tables to get staff and address? Similarly, the Sequila sample database, it's a video rental store, is the idea. And so if I wanted to go and find out what movie rentals I have out, I have to go to the customer table, me, right? Find me, and then go to the rental table and find the rentals that I have, and then I have to go to the film table to cross-reference the title, and I have to go to the inventory table because I rented an inventory ID, which is a film in a store. So anyway, the point is that all that data normalization, and you're doing like, I don't know about you, but I've had developers be like, I can't deal with joins, it's too complicated, just give me something. And there isn't, and the joins that they're doing isn't really a performance thing at all. So giving people a view is pretty useful. So basically schema abstraction. You can make it more simple to write queries. The developer doesn't need to know about the schema, which means you can change it. I don't know if anyone here has ever had to change their schema. The schema is always changing, and sometimes you want to change something. You realize that there's an int unsigned, and you want it to be a signed int or the other way around. And this is just a way that you can do it, and you can keep the data the way you want it while giving developers the data the way they want it. And maybe that might avoid using some bad ORM system that writes the world's worst queries. Who knows? Another reason to do it is security. Because you're defining a view, you can have something that I call like column level security as well as row level security. So you can say, okay, you're not allowed to look at the social security number column. But you can do that with column level grants. It's a pain, but you can do it. With views, you can also give them kind of row level stuff. You can say, hey, Shiri is only allowed to look at her data because you can get only the rows using the view.
And also you can change, in the view you can change the values, and you don't want to change the original table really.
Well, you can, when you update a view, it actually updates the base table because it's all virtual. So, but there are some, we'll get into, there is some trickiness because it's doing the underlying table. There's definitely some trickiness. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, but I just always thought that when I first installed MySQL, I laughed and they said, oh, we're bringing on views. And they said, if you know in the database, why would you want to abstract it? I always find I have to drill back to the views later on. So I just always assumed it was faster to do a straight join than it was to.
Right.
But I guess I understand the abstraction.
Yeah, with the advent of things like ORMs, I think, object relational mappings, I think there's a lot of people that, I don't know why anyone would want to use an ORM, but I understand why they would want to use it to abstract the data. It's that they want to think about it, they don't want to have to think about it in relational terms.
So is the answer that if your tables are simple, there's not a big load, there's not a performance loss?
The performance implication of views is the same as running the query that the view does. So let's take a look at a view definition.
Simplicity is very important. You need to sort something, and you have to take it from 5 tables. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to create a table, to sort it, than
Right, but the performance implications are you still have to go to the 5 tables. For instance, this view, create view staff name as select first name, last name from Sequila.staff. That's, and I can run that here. Okay, so create view staff name as select first name, last name from Sequila.staff. Oh, my semicolon doesn't work. There we go. Okay, so basically you can have any select query in your in your select statement. It's basically create view name as select statement. That's very simple. There's a lot of more options that we'll get into, but that's the most simple one. Now, if I do select star from staff name, it gives me that. If I did select first name, last name from staff, oops, and I gave it there. It's the same thing. If you do an explain here, right, see it says table staff, type all, blah, 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 that's the same thing as if I explain this. So basically, underlying, it just runs the view definition query. Yes?
Another good reason for using views is this very simple way of implementing row-level security.
Right, it's
That
a very
can give
simple way
somebody
of, yeah,
Access
doing
to just particular row columns that you want, pardon, column-level security.
column, yes, column level. And you can do both, actually.
Yeah.
You can get column level and row level.
Yeah.
And column level you have in the grant table anyway,
Mhm.
but it's really a pain to go through the column level stuff.
Exactly.
You just give them like the permission to execute, give them permission to look at the view.
So you
And-
tell them that they can't look at staff at
Right.
all.
You
But
don't
you
give them
can-
the
but
permissions.
then you can give them permission to look at
Right.
whatever the view's name is.
One of the things that you can do is you can actually have two databases. One database that's like the administrator's database, and then one database that's full of views. And that's what the developers use, and it's the main database, and they have no reason to believe otherwise. You know, and you could just say, okay, they have permission to everything in this database, and I have permission to everything in that database, and they can read and write everything in this database. You have to be careful, and we'll see in some of the options, the defining options, about.
An important point is, not that views are faster, but they are not slower.
Well,
That
they
is a-
can't.
that is
yeah.
a- that
It doesn't
is-
add any overhead
You
to
don't
have.
lose anything.
But it does, it can be misleading, because if you have something like the, we looked at the staff list one, right? So if I do, yeah, actually if I do, show create table staff, you know, we have staff ID first name, last name, address ID. So somebody might do some complicated query on the staff address table or whatever, the staff list, and they don't realize the performance implications because they think it's just a regular table. So it can have performance impacts if people don't realize it's a view, but there is no difference in that kind of way that it's. So there we
How
go.
do you do the row-level security?
How do you do what?
Row-level security?
Row level security. Okay.
You put a where clause in there?
Yep. If you would put a where clause in here. So let's. Well, actually, then this next slide is actually to change a view. You just do create or replace view. So I have the example as just concat the first name with a space and the last name, but I'll change the example to what you're asking for, which is create or replace view staff name as select first name, last name from staff where first name equals Mike. So now if we do select star from staff name, we only get Mike, even though select first name, comma, last name from staff, we get Mike and John.
How do I tie this into a user? So let's say,
We'll actually get to that. So I don't. That's one of the options that's slightly more complicated. So we'll get to that in a second. Dropping a view, drop view, and you can also do drop view if exists. So that's pretty useful because it will give you an error if the view doesn't exist, and if you're replicating, you don't want to break replication because your view existed on one machine and not on the other. To find the views, like to find out, hey, what are the views on my system? Show table status will show you. So if we do show table status, and if I spell it correctly, it's always the spelling that gets me.
It doesn't do expansion. Name expansion.
Okay, so you could see that, for instance, the store table, so this is show tables, which shows me all those tables in a database. The store one is a regular table, it's an ENODB table. The staff name, everything's null, and the comment is it's a view. Now, that's obviously not the best way to do it, because it'd be pretty hard to find that. So, so you probably, if you don't know, show tables will show you all the tables in the database. You can also do show tables like, you know, staff %. and we have 3 tables here, staff, staff list, staff name. If you do show full tables, you get, hey, base table versus view. This is actually pretty cool. I didn't actually know about it until a couple weeks ago. So I did not know about show full tables. That's all it shows, is it just shows the tables and whether it's not a table or a view.
Okay, and this is a 5.0, 5.1?
5067. I did successfully upgrade. And again, you can see base table view, base table view. So, and it would, but it was in 5.0, I think I was using 45 before. You can also do use the information schema. So you do show create table information schema dot tables. So it's the information schema database, the table called tables. And it's got catalog, schema, name, table type, engine, version, row format, blah, blah, blah. It's the table type that's going to tell you. So if I do select table name, table type from information schema dot tables, why couldn't we have called it cat? You know, that's one thing other databases have that we don't. Information schema is very long to type out, and there's no alias for it. Anyway, rant over. From information schema tables, where table schema equals Sequila. So the Sequila is the sample database. And again, base table view, so that gives you what you want to see. There's also a table called views in the information schema. And you've got catalog schema name. The view definition is a long text, so you don't want to necessarily do select star. So select table name from information schema dot views, where table schema equals Sequila, and you can see that there's 8 views. Actor info. Can you guys see this?
Mhm.
Is it okay? Nice and big. I tried to make it nice and big. So that's what you can do. That's all the ways that you can see what you have in your database. Yep. All right. So now we get to the questions everybody wants to know. So SQL security is one of the options I was talking about, where you can say, instead of create view as, you say create SQL security, either invoker or definer. And what it means is, if you say definer, or the default, which is definer, then the security levels means that whatever security levels and permissions the definer had is applied to the view. So if I want to limit access to Jacob, I would say SQL security definer, because I have the privileges to it, and Jacob wouldn't have access to the table, but because that view has my powers, he would actually be able to see that stuff. So that's how you get that security. Invoker is the security permissions of the invoker, which you might want to use if you have like an updatable view. You might want to say, this person's allowed to see salaries, but they're not allowed to update salaries, for example. So then you might want the permission of the invoker, because then, you know, maybe I'm allowed to update salaries, but Jacob's not. So it's whatever we have. So this is something that you want to make sure you think about how you, like when you're using views, especially for security, how you want to kind of go about that and how each particular view is going to want that. You don't always necessarily want to give a definer, because you might want that person's permissions to actually affect whether or not they can use, you know, part of the view or not. And of course, if you really wanted to, you could just say that it's always invoker, and then you would still have to do the permissions kind of nightmare anyway, you know, column level and whatever. So but that's an option. So another thing that you can do is you can change who the definer is. If you're the super user, you can change who the definer is. The definer is current user by default. Big surprise. You can only change it if it's a super user, and it has to be a user at host, just like a user in MySQL is a user at a host. So just like when you log in, you have a user at a host. If you have a user at a host that doesn't exist in the table, it will give you a warning, but it will create it. So if I do select user host from mysql.user, order by user, I'll see that I've got two hosts here, root at localhost and Shiri at 127.0.0.1. So if I go back to my, come on, create or replace view staff name, now what I can do is create or replace, and you specify who the definer is before you specify SQL security. So I'm going to do both. So definer equals foo@bar.com. And I don't remember if you have quotes around it. I don't think you do. And then I'm going to say SQL security definer, even though definer is the default. I just want to, make it explicit here. And so now it says, okay, 0 rows affected, 1 warning. So it's the warning, there is no foo@bar.com registered. So now what happens when I try to use the staff name? From staff name, there is no foo.bar registered. So try not to create views for users that don't exist. But again, you're going to have a problem with that if you drop a user or whatnot. So in MySQL is not going to give you a warning for that either. So I think check table staff name, yep, we'll give you that. So that's one thing that you can do is if you're worried about that kind of thing happening and you don't want to wait until somebody points it out to you, doing a check table on your views will help. You obviously don't want to do a check table on all your tables because that could take a while for bigger tables and stuff. But for your views, it might be useful to do something like for everything in information schema.views, run check tables on it. So are there any questions about that? I forget who asked about the how do you do it. Did that answer your question? Great. Alrighty. So the definer, current user, okay, so finding view definitions, there's show create view, and there's also the view definition field in the information schema.view. So if I do show create view staff name, now of course this is kind of really annoying because it's not formatted, but here you've got definer equals foo.bar.com, SQL security definer, the view is staff name, and it puts all the quotes in for you. As select Sakila.staff, blah, 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 and here it even has, look, it's even casting things to UTF-8 for me, how nice. So the other way is to do select star from information schema.views where table name equals staff name. Why do I have a warning? Oh, okay, because I have the definer set. It's interesting, the view definition is blank. That is fascinating.
I've noticed that. It crops up a couple times for me.
You should check the table to check the view to see if there's something wrong with it.
I was using it for a while, the new stuff, and all of a sudden it disappeared. I had to find other ways to store it.
There we go, now it's there. So, yeah, it was probably corrupt in some way. Like if there was a table, there could be a table that was using it and that went away or something. Check tables will also look for that. Although if you try to use a table that doesn't exist, it won't let you create the view. But if you create a view and then drop one of the base tables, it won't complain, but the check table will come out corrupt. So again, you can see here, the view definition is really not formatted nicely, but there you go. So performance implications. So we've been talking a little bit about this. Basically, it's dynamic. It means the query is going to be rerun every single time. Now, the query cache still comes into play. And remember, the query cache is based on the text that you give it. So it's the same thing with views. If you have some kind of text input and the server sent an output and that query is cached, it's going to send the same output on the input. Any change to the underlying base, any of the underlying base tables will throw that away from the query cache. So that's an even bigger performance problem with the query cache, because now if you have a view on 3 different tables, a change in any one of those 3 different tables will cause that query to be invalidated. A query, and again, a query that looks pretty simple, like select star from staff list where first name is Shiri, is going to be a little misleading. Explain does show you the right thing, which we already went over. This is kind of an interesting example that I came up with. So we have some tables, this is a video rental store, right? So let's say I want to do some aggregation, right? I have like a data warehouse, but I'm too cheap, so I'm just doing views on top of, you know, my MySQL database. I don't want to have to like make a star schema or whatever. I don't want to change my schema. I just want to make some views and make things, you know, easy. So let me do create or replace view. I'm going to call it rentals per day. Actually, I'm going to call it test dot rentals per day. Because I want to delete it. From Sequila dot, nope, I have to do a select. So I'm going to select count star, date of the rental date. You know what would be really nice? Show, create, table, rental. So here's the rental. So you've got a rental ID, which is just an auto increment. You've got a rental date, which is a date time. You've got the inventory ID, the customer ID, the return date, it defaults to null, so if you haven't returned it yet, it's null. The staff ID, the person who checked you out. The last update, so it's a current timestamp. And then there's a bunch of keys on the stuff, and some foreign keys, like customer ID has to reference customer ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do create or replace view. I want to have a view of rentals per day. You know, aggregate up that data. So if I do create or replace view, so I'm selecting the count star and the date of the rental date. And I'm going to call that as business day from Sequila.rental. And then I'm going to group by business day. Okay. What did I not do properly? View, oh, as. Select. Let's create view as the select statement. Okay. So now if I do select star from rentals per day, limit 5. Test star rentals per day. There. So this is sample data, so I had no idea what the dates were. But you can see we've got, this is great. Now we've got 8 rentals on the, May 24th, 100. That must have been like Labor Day or something. Nobody went to the video store. 137 rentals on the 25th. Blah blah blah. Well, now what happens if I want to say, and actually let's do an explain on this. Now you can see that it's actually got a derived table here. And if I did it like this, you can see it even better. So basically, we got a derived table that we're doing a full table scan on. Well, what's the derived table? Well, the derived table is rental. Now what this is doing is it's actually making a temporary table and then getting the data from that. So it's using index, using temporary, using file sort, because remember the definition was select and group by business day. So what it's actually doing is it's actually acting, and let's see if I can get this right, is it's actually acting like select star from, I think this is actually right. This is how it's acting. And let me do an explain. This is Windows, so Control A doesn't work. Every derived table, yeah, fine, as. There, that's what it's acting as. Now that seems kind of silly, right? So, and it's going to be the same as, let's call it explain star from there, where business underscore day equals 2008, no, 2005. 2005-05-27. Right, so that's going to be a derived table, even though,
It's not a view.
well, no, it's not correct, it's not from the view, right? But if I did that, basically all I want to get is, so select star from test dot rentals per day, where business day equals 2005-05-27. So that's the explain. And let me do it in vertical format for you. But obviously there's a better way to do this query, right? If you were just writing this query by hand, you would say, okay, all I really want is the count in the business day. So what you would, just to do that from the rentals, what you would do is let me go back to my create or replace definition. Or here, actually, let me go here. you would just put the where clause here. I don't know if I can use business day there, let's see. Yeah, it doesn't work there, but date of rental. Date. There. That's much better. In the explain plan, now you're not using a derived table.
So did you just save yourself from having to make all of those extra counts in the virtual table?
Right, it's not making the virtual table.
Right.
You see, it's just using one table, and, you know, granted it has to do a full index scan because you're using a calculated field, right, date of rental date. But this is where making a view, you know, I was saying that making a view it's a good thing, but it's also can be a bad thing because a query that looks simple might not be. So don't just go and make everything views, because you're going to get something, you know, like this, which looks like a great idea. Hey, I'm doing data warehousing, and then somebody puts a simple query, and this isn't even doing something, you know, that you would say, I can't believe why they did that. That's kind of a normal query. So that's something you have to be careful about. In general, MySQL is just not going to do well if you're trying to have an index and calculate that field, because the index is invalid. You know, it doesn't know, like if you have an index on date, or if you have an index on a number, and then you add 5 to the number, it doesn't, you know, it has no sense that, well, everything is added plus 5, so I can just use the index. It doesn't have that yet. So the question is, why is function-based indexing and materialized views, why are they the same? Why did I say they were the same? And the answer is because if you have this concept of a virtual table, right, and an index on a calculated field, if it's not an actual field in a database, it's a calculation, that's basically a temporary index, right? You would have to, you know, if you think about how would that work, well, you would take all the values from the table, calculate whatever you're calculating, and then make an index based on that. So it's that same kind of virtual table, that virtualness, that if you can't do it with just a single column, we can't do it with a table. Oh yeah.
I think they are working on that.
That is one of the things that they are working on, because it is such a big
Yeah.
feature. I mean, think of something like if I want to find everybody within a certain distance of me using latitude, longitude, right? I would have an index, right, where the great circle distance from them to me is a certain number or less, right? If everyone's within a mile of me, or one latitude degree to make it a lot easier, right? Then it would be, you know, where their latitude minus, you know, absolute value of their latitude minus my latitude equals 1 or less, or is less than 1. That's everyone who's in one latitude point of me. It's going to have to go through every single record, so that would be really, really useful. MySQL just doesn't have that yet. All right, so yeah, if you do abstract it, just make double sure you explain every query, because even the simple ones might not be so simple. So, now that I've told you that it can't do things like temporary tables, there's 2 ways that MySQL will actually process a query on a view. One way is that it will create a temporary table, which is what we saw with the test rentals per day. I believe that this, yeah, it says using temporary. I believe that this is what the explain pan looks like for when it's doing a temp table. What we really wanted it to do was, instead of doing this and making a temporary table, temporary derived table, and then doing the query from that, what we wanted it to do was kind of merge the 2 together. So that instead of select star from this table, instead of that it would do select count star blah blah blah, without doing a select star from making a derived table. But it used the temporary table algorithm to process the query.
Actually, I wonder if you could just go over that derived table business again.
Okay, what about it?
So why is it that the view implicitly runs the sub-select query there? What is it about the view that makes it want to do that?
Well, It depends, because it doesn't always do that. Sometimes it will actually do the merge one. I don't have a good example of when it does the merge one. But we would like it to do the merge on this one, but it's not. So let's see if we can make it. This is actually the rentals per day.
So I mean, that looks like a pretty vanilla query there.
Yeah, so let's say algorithm equals merge. If we do show warnings, it'll say view merge algorithm can't be used here for now. So now it's assuming undefined algorithm. There's only two, there's temp table and merge. I don't know why it can't use it in this particular case.
Right, so this is something to do with how they've implemented it. under
Right.
the- Okay.
And so yeah, now I've made a temp table. Not that it really matters, it's always going to do a temp table. But if I do now, explain, select star from test.rentals per day, limit 5, which is what I did before. Then again, it's the derived table. So what we'd like for it to do is to use the merge, that merge algorithm.
So it just automatically defaults to using the derived table.
No, it defaults, actually, the algorithm that defaults to is, I'll take out algorithm. It actually defaults to using the undefined, which is MySQL will pick whichever one it thinks is better. In this case, it cannot use the merge at all. So the one it thinks is better is the one that it can actually use, which is temp table. So if I do now show create view test.rentals per day, it says, see, create algorithm equals undefined. So it defaults to undefined, which means either one. So what we really wanted to do again is to process that as merge. And it can do that for some queries. I don't actually know why it does, which ones, what are the qualifications for the ones that do and the ones that don't. But sometimes you don't want to merge it because sometimes you'd rather have it be a temporary table. So there isn't always a better one. Has anyone had experiences with views and merge versus temp table? No, that's probably why you're here, to learn about that stuff. So, the other thing is updatable views. So let's, doesn't quite say it here, but we actually now know everything in this create view statement, right? Create algorithm equals undefined, definer equals the definer, so it defaulted to me. SQL security is definer, that was the default. Here's the view test rentals per day as select count 0 as count star. I'm gonna ignore that. Oh, it did a count 0, I see. Instead of doing count star, it just does count 0, which is basically the same thing. Actually, it's technically not the same thing because it'll actually include any null values. Let's start from information schema.views where table name equals, what do I call it, rentals per day. Actually, yeah, rentals per day. And schema, actually table schema I think it's called. Schema equals test. And so we've got our view definition, but it also has this, is this updatable? No. And so what this means is it's not an updatable table, which may actually be one of the criteria for merge, I don't know. But, so what's an updatable table? Well, an updatable view, a view is only updatable if all of the following are true. And that is if there's a one-to-one relationship between rows. You have a join, that will kind of, any aggregation, any joins where you're joining, one table, it's a one-to-many relationship or a many-to-one relationship or a many-to-many relationship. If you have that kind of join going on where one value in one table corresponds to more than one in another, then the view won't be updatable. Which makes sense. How do you know which one to update? Do you update all of them? Do you update none of them? So MySQL just says, I'm not going to allow you to instead of giving you the option or whatever, it's just going to say it's too complicated, I'm not going to allow you to update it at all. Similarly, no subqueries in the view definition. This is because MySQL treats all subqueries as dependent subqueries. And because MySQL treats all subqueries as dependent subqueries, you again have that problem with a one-to-one relationship. And then the other one, okay, well they must, one of the silly ones is that they must they must actually have an underlying base table. Theoretically, you can actually like create a view. I think you can. Let's try this. So use test. Create view, silly, select 1 plus 2. Nope, as. There, I created a view. Now this view isn't updatable because there's no table to update behind it. It's kind of silly and it's kind of, whatever, but you never know what you'll run into the wild. So I figure I'll say this explicitly. And you can see, is updatable? No. Now if I do select 1 plus 2 from Sakila.rental, let's just say select 1 from Sakila, I can do that too. And again, it's still not updatable because there's no columns reference. So you actually have to have something that you can update in the table in order for it to be updatable. It sounds obvious, but there are times where you just start like banging your head going, why is it updatable? And then you realize, oh, because there's nothing to update. Similarly, it should kind of be obvious that if it's a one-to-many relationship, it can't, like what would you update? But that's harder to kind of figure out. And then there are views in the view definition that aren't updatable. Then that view won't be updatable. So, yes.
Is there any way to make a view read-only even if those conditions are satisfied?
So the question is there a way to make a view read-only even if all those conditions are satisfied? Sure, you could make a user that only has permissions to read the underlying base tables and not write to them, and then makes SQL security definer equals that. It's kind of a hack. As far as I know, there isn't a way to kind of force it to be not updatable unless one of these conditions are true. It's just kind of an automatic thing. So yeah, and also if the algorithm is going to be temp table, that's another way to figure it out. If you have something like our group by that can only use temp table, it can't use merge. Because it's making a temporary table for the view, you can't actually update it. It's also a one-to-many relationship, but if you have something that's, I don't know if you can have something that's not an aggregate that always makes a temporary table, but if you did, if you had something like that, you couldn't because it's using a temporary table. So you can't really, if you update the temporary, even if MySQL let you update the temporary table, it goes away, and there's no update. So, let's talk about even more problems with updatable views. So we have this staff list view. Show use Sakila, show create view staff list. And it's, so staff list as select staff ID as ID, concat staff address. So let's start from staff list. That's the one that has the name, address, zip code, phone, city, country, and whatever SID is. So I have the staff list, right? I'm a developer, I don't know what my DBA has done, but they've given me the staff list table. Well, now I want to go and update a staff member, update their address. So great, okay, I'm gonna, update staff list, and actually let me check that it's actually updatable. So. List. And then let me just select, let me select star, but I would just normally select is updatable. But you could say, see it says is updatable, yes. Great, okay, so now I'm gonna update staff list, set address equal to, this person moved to now 20 Main Street, and the zip code, city, state, that's all the same. So 20 at Main Street, where ID equals 1, right? So we're updating Mike moved. Okay, it changed. Great. There's no warnings. Wonderful. But what it actually changed was the underlying base table of address. Show create table staff. So if you see, here's the address ID, and there's a key on address ID, and it's a foreign key. Address ID, except, here it is, foreign key address ID, references address on update cascade, great. Okay, so if I do now select address ID from staff, where staff ID equals 1, and we get 3. So now I'm gonna select star from address, where address ID equals 3. And that's now 20 Main Street. And I probably should have shown you before that it was 23 Workhaven Lane or whatever it was, but I didn't. So you're just gonna have to trust me that I actually updated it. And you can see that I updated it because the last update was 8:09 PM on September 8th, 2008. So,
But you did that through a table before, right? Through a view?
what'd you say?
You did that through a view before?
I did, right, the way I updated it was I updated it through the view staff list.
But now if you take a look at it through the view, it didn't work?
No, it actually worked. So what, may you ask, is the problem?
Yeah.
Well, what happened if Mike was actually living with 3 roommates and he moved out? I've now changed the address ID, so I changed the address of everybody who was living at that address. I've changed the address ID, not Mike's address. Mike's address is still address ID 3. And that can be a problem with updatable views. You want to make sure that you're updating the right thing. Did anyone have a question, or?
And you just answered it.
Okay, great. What was it specifically?
Well, that it was following, it wasn't creating a new address entry, it was changing the address ID value.
Right, correct. So,
And if somebody else had that same address ID, they just moved along, they just moved in with mine.
right. The other thing that you need to, if you want to insert, let's say we have a new staff member, so insert it to staff list. What do we have, like ID name, address, zip code, phone. Actually, ID is, I don't need to put ID in because it's an auto increment. No, it's, well, it's staff ID, but let me just put it in there. Name, address, zip code, phone. Well, no, let me know. I'm trying to think, like, if I were a developer, what would I do if I had this table? Phone, city, and country. And the staff ID I'm going to leave out too, because I think SID is staff ID. So now I want to add, let me add, let's see, the name is going to be Josh Kramer. The address is going to be 123 Main Street. He lives on the same street as Mike Hillier now. The zip code is going to be 02118, which is Boston. The phone number is going to be 123-456-789. 7890. The city is going to be Boston, and the country is going to be USA. Okay, this is what a query development wrote, right, if they're given that. Okay, and that says unknown column zip code in field list. Okay, well, it actually says zip space code. So, this is actually using backticks. I don't think you can see it. Cannot modify more than one base table through a joined view.
Because of the address.
Because of the address, exactly. So it's going to be difficult. Also, if you have a view that selects columns that, so let's say we, I had a select star from staff name, right? So if I now want to insert into staff name, first name, last name. Now remember, I restricted these all to Mike. So let's first add someone whose first name is Mike. Let's call him Mike Kramer. Okay, field of view underlying staff name does not have a default value, which means that something in the staff table doesn't have a default table, and I haven't put it in my view. So it can't insert it. Show create table staff. So again, right, so there's no default for first name or last name, but I gave it a first name and last name. There's no default for address ID, so it couldn't create it because I didn't have an address ID. You can do an insert if the table has default values for everything else. So again, if you're kind of building some kind of like, it's almost like an API, it's a DPI, it's a database programming interface. If you build one of those, you have to take all this stuff into account. Because it can be very useful and very powerful to do what you need without having to have all of your developers take courses in how do you write queries from MySQL. But there's a lot of stuff you need to take into consideration.
And the reason for that is that tables in some way behave like an objects, data objects. Essentially, that's what they are. That's why when you insert something, it is like you have, default names for your method call.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, sorry.
Yep. And a view object and a table object are basically the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just that a view object is virtual and the definition is in terms of the table.
It does occur to me that if you have developers who refuse to do a join, then they're actually going to explode if you ask them to do an insert. Or something like this.
So the comment was, if developers don't want to do a join, then this kind of insert is going to make their heads blow up. Well, not if everything is taken into consideration and you actually let them do the, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. When I can see
But that's
how
when you make it like a stored procedure that's like make a new person.
Yeah, I can see.
to change all that.
I can see how this is good for read. I'm
It's
less
good
sure
for
about
yeah.
it for write.
It's good for reading. It's okay. Well, and the problem is that that people might think they might not realize that it's for read only and not for writing. I mean,
Yeah.
if you show someone the schema of a table, and you're going to say, oh, but it's only for reading.
Yeah, they won't
Yeah.
like that.
So yes.
Yes, I come from an Oracle background, but I find views more for queries as opposed for updating anyway. Some
Mhm.
views are better, views are better for security, you can't update them.
Yep.
You want
That's
to provide
right.
data just to the person, they don't want to see back end. So not updating is actually a very good thing.
Right, and as we talked about before, we can't force something. As far as I know, we can't force anything to be updatable or not updatable. It just is or it isn't. So you do make a good point that for the most part you are using it for security. Or let's put it this way: when you're using a view for security, you probably don't want people to update it. You probably just want them to read. So moving along, we talked about inserting into the view. Same thing as inserting into a table. We talked about you need to make sure that all of the unique field tables, are unique. Again, it has to be one-to-one relationship, right? Actually, unique field names is if you're joining two tables and you say like select star from A join B using some column that has the same field name, staff ID joining staff ID. You can't insert into that because how does it know which value for which staff ID, even though you're joining on it, especially if you're not joining on it. And then if the non-view fields, this is what we just talked about, non-view fields have default values, because if you have a field that's not in the view that doesn't have a default value, how does it know what to put in? And then non-calculated fields. So if you do have and non-aggregated fields, obviously. But if you do have, where date of rental date equals whatever, it can't undo the calculation. It just doesn't know how. There's no way to reverse the calculation to put the right source data into the column. Constraints. This is actually something that's neat. So another thing that you can do with views is kind of simulate a check constraint. I saw his head perk up right there because check constraints are all over SQL Server, and they're great and they're wonderful. We do have some limited type of check constraints in MySQL, just by way of the fact that we've got data types, right? Data type is basically a check constraint. It means that if my data type is int, I can't put a in it. That's a constraint. But we don't have, and we have constraints for foreign keys. Whatever I put in this column has to appear in this column in this other table. But we don't have it's a table for age. So we don't want anything, below 0, okay, we can do int unsigned. We don't want anything above, 150 or 200, let's say. You can't really do that in a schema, which you can do that in SQL Server, and you can do it in Oracle too, but you can't do that in MySQL. With views, however, you can kind of simulate a check constraint kind of thing. So let's do that. So let's do something like create or replace view. Let's call it staff email as select first name, last name, email from staff. where email is like %@sequila.com. So I'll select star from staff email, and we've got nothing, because if we do select email from staff, we've got, oh, it's at sequilastaff.com. So let's replace that view. So now it's there. So let's do this. Let's update staff email. Set email equal to mike.hillier@foo.com, where, let's see, first name equals Mike, just because we know we only have one record. Okay, rows matched 1, change matched 1, warning 0. Okay, so now let's select star from staff email. And we've only got 1, because if we select our email addresses, we actually changed Mike's to Mike Hillier. So let's change it back. Set email equal to mike.hillier@sequilastaff.com. Oops. Oh, it's not in the, this is actually interesting. It's not in the view anymore, so it didn't change it. Did you see what happened here? I said, oh, let me change staff email back. And it said, okay, but I didn't change any rows because it's not in the view anymore. So I actually want to update the staff. Okay, 1 row affected. This is why I always actually, staff email. This is why I always do this checking, obsessive checking. Because I thought I updated the table, no errors came back, but I didn't notice, hey, 0 rows. So it's kind of why I just do things really fast, but I'm always checking. So, okay, we're back to normal. Now let's change our definition from here. Let's add at the end with check option. What do I want? I want with check option. I didn't actually write down my example. That was awesome. Oh, right, okay. With check option, because there's no other option then. So with check option is now going to check to make sure that whatever I do, this is enforced. So if I do select email from staff email, great. If I now go back to my update, so I'm going to set staff email equal to mikehillier@foo.com, where my first name is Mike. This worked last time, and now it doesn't, because it says check option failed, sequilastaff.email. So this is a way to say, okay, if it's going to change what's in the table, you can't, if it's going to change what's in the view, you can't change the underlying table.
What command would you run to debug that check option if that just appeared in your application one day?
You don't know, because there's actually no option here. So if you had like so the question is, if there are 7 things in the where clause, how do you know which one failed with this error? And the answer is, MySQL error codes stink, and we're sorry.
What about
Patty's sorry. I'm not sorry. I don't work for MySQL or Sun, so I'm not sorry. But I'm sorry because I have to use it. But you don't know. All you know is that something in the where clause failed. So you can
Just
If you
remove
want to check
one by
option,
one. Remove one by one. It
Right.
helps.
And the other thing is, you can't say check some of these but not all of these. I want you to check this, this, and this, but not that and that. Whatever's in your where clause is going to check.
Also, it's limited on the,
Yeah, it's limited on the where clause.
so if
It's-
you
it's-
wanted it to work, you just have to comply with the where clause.
Right. Now, you also can, I mean, you can have it work if you don't say with check option. Right? So if you
But
just
that's
want,
probably in there until you remove it,
right, the default is not with check option.
right?
Basically, it's the keywords with check option that enforce that. So if you want to enforce it, you can, but you don't have to. And by default, it's not enforced. Now, the other thing is you can have it local or you can have it cascaded. Well, what does that mean? That means if you've got a view, and then you've got a view that references that view, and then you've got another view that references that view, you can cascade the check option
To all the wheres.
to all the wheres, all the way down. So, again, can be
Go
pretty
nuts.
useful, can be pretty useful,
Yeah.
can be pretty tricky. The one good thing is that if you see any error here, where's the error? There we go. Check option failed Sequila staff email. It shows you which view has the error. So at least if you are cascading, it won't show you which part of the where clause failed on, but it will show you which table it failed on, or which view it failed on. So that's something, right? But I mean, having the check option period is pretty good.
Does that mean check option has to be in every view too, or?
No, it will enforce it as if with check option was on every view, even though it's not. So you can now envision making 2 of every view, one with check option, one without the check option, to do what you want. I mean, if your application calls for that. All right, so here, now we finally get the full create view. Here's all the options that we know about. Create or replace, the algorithm undefined merge temp table, definer is user current user, you know, the user that you define, user or host. SQL security definer invoker, view name, here's the column list you can put in if you want. You can actually say the list of columns, just like insert into, you can give a list of columns, same thing here. As, I didn't actually show that, so my bad, but I don't think it's quite that important. So as select statement, so as the select statement at the end, you can put with cascaded check option, with local check option. Default is cascaded. That's kind of important. So yeah, views referencing other views by default will check all turtles all the way down. All right, so how do you change a view? Well, we've seen create or replace view, but you can also do alter view. But in an alter view, you always have to put the select statement in there. So even if you're not changing the select statement, you have to put it in there, which is why I pretty much use create or replace view. Because the big thing that you're putting in is the SQL is the select statement. So if you're like, oh, I want to, you know, instead of going here and saying, okay, here's my thing, what if I want to add with check option? Instead of saying alter table view, add check option, right? I'm going to have to put the select statement in anyway. So alter view, what is it good for? I don't know, but there you go. You always have to have a select statement. It's better than triggers where there's no alter trigger and you have to drop the trigger and re-put it in. So we should thank our blessings. We should thank for the little things, I guess. But so here's the alter view. So you can alter, and now it's very similar, as you can see, to the create. These are all optional. So you can say, okay, alter, you know, view name as select statement with check option. But at that point, it's pretty much just as big as the regular create or replace statement anyway. Algorithm is undefined merge temp table, definer, blah, blah, blah. And of course, one has to think, I don't know how it works on mine, but my guess is that it still just deletes the thing and adds it because you're giving it the select statement. So who knows? So let's talk about replication in views, because we all have, you know, our slaves that we use for replication and read queries or whatever. Create view, alter view, and drop view they're just like create table, alter table, drop table. They will replicate if you have if you're replicating all tables, all databases, those will replicate. They're treated like tables. So if you have like replicate do table or replicate ignore table, that's actually the name. So if you have like replicate ignore table staff percent with wildcards, or whatever the wildcard, ignore table, staff equals staff percent, then it will ignore all views that start with staff and all tables that start with staff. Now, this also could be pretty useful for security, right? You can have like one master where everything gets written, and then you can have a slave that doesn't replicate certain databases or certain tables, and it'll replicate a view but not a table. Of course, that might fail if you don't replicate the base table, so you have to be careful. So yeah, if you are ignoring a view or a table, if you're ignoring both the view and all the base tables it has, great. If you ignore the tables that are, you know, one or more table that's underlying a view, but you don't ignore the view, you're going to have problems. The good news is, again, so like if I do something like alter table staff rename foo, right, and then I try select star from staff email. It says view Sequila staff email references invalid table or columns or functions or definer invoker if you lack rights to use them. So there's some error in there somewhere. Again, if I do check table staff email, it will show me that the table Sequela staff doesn't exist. So that actually does help me kind of whittle down what's the problem. So now I'm going to alter table staff. No, alter table food name staff. So that is an example of what would happen if you replicated the view, but not the table. Because the underlying base table doesn't exist, you were kind of looking below. So you'll get this in the check table if that isn't working. So be careful. What else do I have here? Yes. Next one, view limitations. Okay. A view can reference another view or it can reference a base table. You can't reference a temporary table. You can't reference, let's see, you can't reference a derived table because it's not accessible to you. It's derived. It happens on the spot. You can't really reference it. We talked about referencing a table that doesn't exist. Same if you try to reference a view that doesn't exist. You'll get if you try to create a view that doesn't exist. So from table that does not exist, except table that does not exist. And then it says table Sequela, a table that does not exist, doesn't exist. So if you try to create a table if you try to create a view that references a table or a view that doesn't exist, it won't let you. However, it will let you create it and then drop the underlying table. So again, check table, you just have to be careful about that. Things that you can include in a view definition are variables, such as system variables. So you can't say, create table, blah, select at max allowed packet. Even though select, let's try this. Create table, test view, because I want a view, huh? Create replace view, test view as select at max allowed packet. And then let me just do select at max allowed packet. So yeah, so I actually, the select statement is completely valid, but the error I got when trying to create the view says view select contains a variable or parameter. So you can't actually, even though it's a valid select statement to say select variable, you can't actually do it. So you can't do user variables either. Select, this is an at, which is a system, but if I do select foo, it won't let me do that. You can call stored routines, stored procedure, whatever, but you can't use a parameter in the table definition anywhere. Which kind of makes sense. You usually can't kind of grab parameters there, but so yeah, you can't use user variables, you can't use local variables. If you do something like create a view that has order by in the view definition, and then you use an order by in your query, it's the one in your query is going to override the view definition. So that's the rule on that one. Now for other things that do that, like limit, sky's the limit. You don't know what it's going to do. I tried playing around a little to see if I can get some rules. So if you say select star from film limit 100 is first 100 films as a view, and then you say select star from first 100 films limit 5, I ended up getting 5 rows back. When I tried it the opposite way, where I said get select star from film limit 5, and then I did order by limit 100, I got 5. So that kind of sounds like it does what it kind of should be doing, but limit is one of those ones where you don't know what it's going to do. So think twice about using limit in your view definition. Using order by in your view definition, again, even though the order by in your query will override it, if it has to do a file sort to make your view, you might not want to do that unless, you might just want people to have to specify order by. So let's see. The other SQL that will do kind of whatever, depending on whatever MySQL feels like, is select into. So if you're selecting into a table or selecting into a variable, select for update, select lock and share mode, select procedure, select distinct is another one that you can be careful about, and then select SQL small result. I don't know what select procedure and select SQL small result do, but it's kind of interesting to learn that you can't put them in a view definition. Or you can, but beware. And that's all I have. Any questions, comments, suggestions?
One place that we used views was, we had a schema that, because of our own fault, really wasn't very good. Yeah, it was our fault and it really wasn't very good, so we needed to change our schema. And the approach that we took was we created views that would have created tables like we wanted it to. Started to write our Java code that used those views, and eventually pruned and carved away all of our other Java code and used the old ones. And it was a little laborious, but we never broke the product while we were going through this process. And then once we switched all of our views back to real tables, our performance exploded. It was really great.
Yeah, that is something, and the other thing you can do too is if you did have some crufty old code, you could get rid of the table and then make a view with that same name that's using the new table. So in the event that you do that and you're like, oh man, but we can't replace this, it's some third-party software that somebody downloaded and you figured a while ago, we don't even know what machine the code is on, you can always kind of do it that way, which is kind of nice. Or really nice actually, but yeah, it's nice to be able to, to do those kind of in-place changes in a way. And even if the schema was great when you started out, things grow kind of organically, and all of a sudden, hey, people are using your application in ways you never thought they would. So it's something that happens. I mean, schemas are always changing, and even when you design it really well, you may have to do that. But that's a great technique for doing that. And since alter tables are very quick, one thing you can do is you can have so you have your table, then you have your view that's kind of your new table that's better performance. You can alter your table to rename it, and then alter a different view to rename it as the table name, and it happens like that. And then if there's something wrong, you can kind of switch back. So you can basically have one table that is like, okay, here's the data source, then you have different views where it's like, okay, don't use the physical table, use the view, and then you can switch them around so that when you do need to change schemas and stuff, it's painless. Although, probably writing the views and getting everything right is hard. And you don't get the performance gain until you actually put the new tables in. But once you do, it's really, really just really nice. All right, great. Does anyone, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
This is, guys, thank you.